It started as a story whispered around campfires and carved into the memories of a town that never healed. 27 seniors, full of dreams and teenage fire, set off for one last adventure before adulthood. They boarded a yellow school bus with sleeping bags, snacks, and promises of a summer they would never forget, but they never came back. No calls, no messages, no goodbyes, just silence. For 22 years, the town of Alder Creek carried a wound that refused to close, a question that no one could answer. Where did they go, and why did no one ever find them? Then, in the summer of 2021, deep in Oregon's Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest, a hiker strayed off the beaten path and stumbled upon something no one was ever meant to find. It was rusted, broken, and nearly buried by time, but its faded yellow color told him everything. It was the missing school bus. And inside, the past had been waiting. Moldy backpacks still strapped to seats, Polaroids warped with moisture, and, in the very back, a pile of clothing with something beneath it that would change everything, a human jawbone. What happened to the class of 1999 in those woods? And why were only some of them found? If you want to uncover the truth behind these questions, then stay with me through this chilling tale. Like this video, subscribe to my channel Unscripted Tales, and help us reach 5,000 likes. This one is a dare from my mother, and I cannot let her down, so do it for her. And let us dive deep into one of the most disturbing mysteries never fully told. When the investigators arrived at the scene, they were not just met with a long-lost bus, but with a scene preserved by the forest itself. The number on the side, though nearly eaten away by rust and moss, was just visible: Bus 57. Inside, it was like time had frozen. Dust layered every surface. Ivy had crawled through shattered windows, old cassette tapes, high school jackets, and yearbook pages fused together by mold littered the floor. But what struck them most was the eerie stillness, as if the forest had been guarding a secret and only now, after 2 decades, had let it go. And then there were the remaining 17 human skeletons in various stages of decay. Some were fully skeletal, others partially preserved. All of them bore items belonging to the missing students from Forest Heights High School. It was a haunting confirmation. This was the bus, these were their students. But the deeper the investigators looked, the more impossible everything became. There was no record of the bus ever being rented. No road nearby. No sign of how it had arrived there. And perhaps most disturbing, several of the students' belongings had been placed in deliberate, unsettling arrangements, like a ritual. This was not just an accident. Something had happened out there. Something meant to stay hidden. But the forest had finally given up its secret. Back in May of 1999, the halls of Forest Heights High School echoed with the sounds of countdowns and celebration. Graduation was only days away. Students filled the corridors with laughter, shoving books into lockers for the last time, and dreaming of summer adventures before college began. But among the sea of navy caps and gowns, 27 seniors stood a little closer than most. They had grown up together in this quiet Oregon town. They were not just classmates, they were a family. Bound by shared secrets, Friday night football, heartbreaks, and memories stitched together by years of teenage life. Lena Grayson walked the hallway with calm, quiet confidence. Her blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears, a folder pressed tightly to her chest. She was class valedictorian, student council president, and the pride of Alder Creek. Her father, Meyer Thomas Grayson, spoke of her achievements in nearly every town hall meeting, but behind her perfect grades and polite smile was a girl quietly cracking from pressure. Few knew about the sleepless nights, the tears in bathroom stalls, and the panic she kept hidden from everyone. Close behind her, Brandon Yates weaved through students with a camcorder in hand. He was filming everything: laughs, hugs, even the janitor mopping the floor. Brandon was the class clown, always joking, always filming, and always noticing what others missed. He said he was working on something special, a documentary about their final week together. He called it his time capsule, said it would be like the Blair Witch, but funnier. Darius Cole was the tallest guy in school, known for his broad shoulders and calm presence. He had just accepted a football scholarship to a big university. Coaches believed in him, his mother believed in him, and most of the school did too. But Darius carried a quiet fear that maybe he had already peaked, that the best years of his life were behind him, and he was walking straight into something he could not control. Then there was Ava Kim. She barely spoke, but when she did, her words stayed with you. Always seen with her sketchbook, she drew scenes of trees, fog, and shadowy figures. No one knew if she had ever actually seen the places she drew, or if they came to her in dreams. Most classmates overlooked her. But those who looked close saw something haunting in her eyes, like she already knew something. The rest of them did not. That Friday afternoon, as the final bell rang, someone blasted a Green Day song from their car stereo. Teachers handed out the last permission slips. The Rogue River camping trip was all anyone could talk about. It had been planned for months. No parents, just seniors, nature, and a final moment of freedom. They were ready to leave, behind textbooks and rules for the quiet wild of Oregon. On the morning of June 5th, they gathered in the school parking lot. Grainy camcorder footage later showed them laughing, hugging, throwing bags onto the bus. They posed for a group photo, 27 of them smiling in the sunlight. The bus was driven by Mr. Ronald Grisham, a substitute driver filling in for the regular one who had called in sick last minute. The mood was cheerful. That was the last moment anyone saw them. Later that evening, one of the mothers, Denise Holloway, received a voicemail at exactly 6:42 p.m. It was from her daughter Mia. The message was short, strange. In the background, there was laughter, someone yelling to turn something off, and then a long pause. No goodbye, no click. Only static. The bus never checked in at the campground. At first, people assumed they were delayed. But by the next morning, panic spread through Alder Creek. Calls went unanswered. No one had heard from their children. Search and rescue teams were sent into the forest. Helicopters circled overhead. Dogs sniffed through trails. But there were no tire tracks. No broken branches. No signs of a crash. The campground host confirmed no bus had ever arrived. It was as if the bus had vanished into the trees. What happened to the disposable camera found in the river bend 10 days later? And who sent the letter that read, "We made it, please stop looking"? The search for the missing students quickly turned from hopeful to desperate. By Sunday night, Alder Creek was no longer just a quiet town. It was a place holding its breath, waiting for news that never came. Search teams pushed deeper into the Rogue River wilderness. Volunteers combed the trails. Helicopters flew over the tree line again and again, but the forest gave nothing back. No broken branches, no signs of tire tracks. No sign the bus had ever passed through. By the third day, rescue teams expanded their search area. A week passed, nothing. Then something strange was found near a river bend, 15 miles from the main road. A disposable camera, half buried in mud, waterlogged and cracked. Investigators opened the casing, but the film inside was gone. Someone had removed it. 10 days later, another mystery surfaced. The parents of Jonah Callahan, one of the missing students, received a letter in their mailbox. No return address, no postmark, just 5 words written in shaky, uneven handwriting. "We made it, please stop looking." The family thought it was a miracle, but the handwriting did not fully match Jonah's. Experts said it looked like it had been traced or copied. Close, but not quite real. Still, the letter spread like wildfire. Some began to wonder if the students had staged their disappearance. Maybe they had run away to start new lives. Others whispered darker things: cults, forest rituals, strange symbols. Some believed the kids were still alive, hiding in the woods, or taken by someone or something that never meant for them to return. But no one came forward. No bodies were found. The bus never appeared. And with no solid clues, the case was quietly closed 2 months later. It was labeled an unsolved group disappearance, a missing persons case that the state could not explain. But the parents never stopped searching. Some returned to the woods every year, hoping for anything. A sign, a footprint, a sound. Others filled bulletin boards and gas station windows with faded flyers. One father, Marcus Vasquez, whose daughter Layla was among the missing, kept a journal filled with every theory he heard, every rumor, every sleepless night. He once wrote a single line that no one could forget: "I do not think they drove off the road. I do not think it was an accident. I think something took them. Something that did not want them found." No one ever proved him wrong. What did the forest keep hidden for 22 years before a hiker stumbled upon something that should have stayed buried? June 3, 2021. Nearly 22 years since the class of 1999 disappeared without a trace. The forest had been silent all that time, holding tight to its secrets. But that morning, everything changed. A seasoned hiker named Ethan Miller, an off-duty firefighter from Medford, decided to explore a rarely used trail deep within the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest. He was not searching for anything in particular, just peace, quiet, and a few hours away from the noise of everyday life. But as he moved through thick brush, climbing over fallen logs and ducking under moss-covered branches, he saw it, a flash of yellow peeking through the dense green. At first, he thought it was an old piece of logging equipment or a ranger outpost, long forgotten. But when he pushed back the vines and brush, he froze. It was a bus, rusted, sinking into the forest floor, its windows cracked, its tires half buried in the earth. The number barely visible on the side, Red 57. Ethan forced the swollen door open, and a wave of damp, moldy air poured out. Inside, time had stood still. Ivy crept in through shattered glass, dust coated everything. Backpacks sat on seats, untouched. A Letterman jacket hung off a metal frame. Torn yearbook pages lay stuck together in the aisle. There were graduation caps, faded Polaroid photos, even a cassette player warped by moisture. And at the very back, beneath a pile of collapsed luggage and torn clothing, Ethan saw something that made his blood run cold. A jawbone. Human. When law enforcement arrived, the area was quickly sealed off. Forensic teams and investigators swarmed the scene. What they found confirmed what many had feared, and some had never stopped believing. This was the missing school bus, the one from 1999. And it was not empty. 17 sets of remains were discovered inside, some fully skeletonized, others partially preserved. They were scattered throughout the bus, some still dressed, some with personal items close by. Each one was identified through DNA and dental records. They belonged to students and staff from Forest Heights High School. But not everyone was there. Out of 28 people who had gone missing, 26 students and 2 teachers, 11 were still unaccounted for. 9 students, 2 adults, their bodies were nowhere in or around the bus. And then came something even more disturbing. Under the driver's seat, in a mold-covered backpack, a manila folder was found, waterlogged but still mostly intact. Inside were charcoal and pencil sketches, each signed by Ava Kimda, quiet artist who always sat alone, drawing things no one else understood. The sketches were dark, haunting. One showed a circle of people standing around a fire in a forest clearing. Another showed figures with blank masks. One was frantic, nearly shredded at the corners, and showed trees bleeding onto the ground, the blood forming strange symbols. And one final sketch showed a bus, their bus, surrounded by tall, faceless shadows, and in the front seat, behind the wheel, was a figure wearing a mask. The sketches made no sense to investigators. No one could identify the symbols. No one could explain how a bus that large ended up deep in the woods with no tracks, no path, and no damage. It had not crashed. It had been placed there, hidden like someone or something had wanted it to disappear. Where were the missing students and teachers, who were not found with the others? And why did Ava Kim draw scenes that felt like a warning before they ever happened? 7 days after the discovery of the bus, just when the shock was beginning to settle, something happened that no one could have predicted. Early in the morning, before most of the town had even finished their coffee, the doors of the Bend police station swung open. A man stepped inside, thin, gaunt. His clothes were tattered, his hair long and tangled, clinging to his pale face. His hands shook slightly, and his eyes darted around the room like he was expecting something or someone to follow him. He walked slowly to the front desk and leaned forward. The officer on duty looked up, startled by the sudden presence. The man spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Brandon Yates, from the class of 1999. For a moment, silence filled the room. It was like time paused. Officers stared. Some stood up slowly. Others exchanged looks of disbelief. The name Brandon Yates had not been spoken aloud in a very long time. He was one of the 27 who had vanished without explanation over 2 decades ago. His body had never been found. Until now, no one believed any of them had survived. Sergeant Lillian Carter stepped forward, calm but alert. She asked the man for identification. But Brandon only shook his head. "I was never supposed to come back," he said, eyes wide with something deeper than fear. "They are still watching." The room felt colder. Officers grew tense. Was this a prank? A delusion? But then, a forensic technician walked in holding a rushed DNA test report. The results were clear. Fingerprints, DNA. All matched. This man was Brandon Yates. For the first time since arriving, Brandon looked up fully. His voice trembled as he repeated himself. "I should not have come back. I should have stayed hidden." Sergeant Carter tried to calm him, but he would not stay. He turned for the door, muttering to himself, "I cannot stay here. They will find me." She stepped forward to stop him, but he had already slipped out into the street. Gone. The room stood frozen. What had just happened? They had waited 22 years for a survivor, for someone to tell them the truth, and when one finally came, he brought only more fear. Brandon was not a man who had escaped a tragedy. He was a man who had run from something much worse. What did Brandon see in those woods that made him believe he would never be safe again? Brandon did not stay hidden for long. Just 3 days after walking out of the police station, he returned this time willingly. He was placed in a quiet interview room, where 2 investigators sat across from him. A recorder clicked on. The room was silent, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights and Brandon's uneven breathing. He looked like a man. carrying the weight of 2 lifetimes, one from the world he left behind in 1999, and one from wherever he had been since. He began slowly, like every word took effort. He said it started the day the bus broke down. They were deep in the forest, farther than any road should have taken them. The bus engine stalled. The driver, Mr. Grisham, stepped out to check the front, but he never came back. They waited for hours. No cell signal. No clue how to get out. Then, just before sunset, people appeared from the trees. Not hikers, not rangers, but a group dressed in gray robes, covered in dirt and ash, faces half hidden by cloth and leaves. They called themselves the Gathered. Brandon said they spoke calmly, kindly, offering food, water, and shelter. They said the outside world had collapsed, that society was breaking down, and that the students were lucky to be here. At first, no one believed them. But with no way to call for help and the forest growing darker by the minute, the group had no choice. They followed the strangers through the trees. The place they arrived at was strange, a circle of cabins built from old wood and metal, smoke curling from chimneys, fire pits burning low. The Gathered welcomed them like family. They gave them places to sleep, strange-tasting food, and told them to rest, but things started changing quickly. Brandon's voice trembled as he spoke. He said they were not allowed to speak about their pasts. The Gathered said that memories were a disease, that in order to be reborn, they had to forget. The students were told to stop using their names. They had to follow new schedules. They were given new clothes, gray robes like the rest. Everything felt slow, almost dreamlike. He believed they were drugged. Some of the students accepted it. Others tried to resist. But the ones who did, Brandon paused, were taken. They were told it was called the offering, a sacred act to protect the new life being built. He remembered the screams from the woods at night. He never saw the ones taken again. He stared at the table, voice now barely more than a whisper. I saw what they did. I saw the fire. I saw the masks. I knew I had to leave, or I would be next. By 2006, Brandon had finally found a chance to escape. He ran through the forest for days, terrified he was being followed. He never told anyone. He was too afraid. He changed his name, lived off the grid, convinced that if he stayed hidden, they would forget him. But when he saw the news about the bus being found, he knew they had not forgotten. Why did the Gathered choose the class of 1999, and what twisted purpose did the forest serve for their so-called rebirth? Brandon's story spread like wildfire. News stations picked it up within hours, and by the next morning, the entire country was watching. Some people called him a hero. Others said he was lying. But in the town of Alder Creek, the reaction was even more intense. Some families clung to his every word, searching for pieces of their own lost children in the nightmare he described. Others were furious, unable to accept that their sons and daughters had been taken by something so strange, so dark, and so far from anything they could understand. Investigators moved quickly to protect Brandon. After what he had shared, they feared someone or something might still be watching. He was placed in protective custody in a quiet facility, far from cameras and reporters. But even in safety, Brandon stayed alert. He checked the windows. At night, he jumped at small sounds, and he never stopped repeating one chilling thought. They are still out there. Authorities reopened the entire case, but the forest gave up little more. The area surrounding the bus was searched for weeks. Drones flew overhead. Dogs combed the ground. But no new evidence surfaced. No signs of the missing 11. No new sketches. No traces of the Gathered. Then Brandon made a choice that would divide the town forever. He wrote a book. It was not just a collection of memories. It was a full confession, a timeline, a deep look into life inside the forest commune. He described the rituals, the strange chanting, the reconditioning, the offerings. He described a masked figure he believed led the group, someone the others called the voice. This person never showed their face, never spoke directly, but everyone followed their command, without question. And it was this figure, Brandon claimed, who chose who would stay and who would be sacrificed. The book became a national bestseller. Some read it as a survivor's cry for truth. Others believed it was fiction, a man broken by guilt and grief. Talk shows debated its meaning. Podcasts tore it apart, piece by piece. But in Alder Creek, the divide cut deep. Some families finally felt a sense of closure. Others believed Brandon had stolen the image of their children and twisted it into something terrible. There were protests, accusations, and even threats. Still, Brandon never changed his story. He said the truth was darker than anything the world wanted to hear. But even as the world argued, something deeper remained. The bus had been found. The remains had been recovered. And yet, the forest still held secrets no one could reach. What final message did Brandon leave behind when he returned to the place that haunted him most? Months passed. The news cycle quieted. The reporters moved on, but in Alder Creek, the weight of the mystery still pressed down like fog on the treetops. The bus had been pulled from the forest. 17 families had received remains to bury, but the missing 11 still haunted every conversation, every dark patch of woods, every unanswered question. Brandon Yates had become a ghost in his own right, living quietly, speaking only when needed, watching the world try to make sense of something it was never meant to understand. Then, on a cold overcast afternoon, Brandon returned to the place where it had all begun. Forest Heights High School. The building looked different now, new paint, new security lights, but the heart of it remained the same. The echo of laughter that no longer existed, the spaces where friends once walked side by side, unaware they were living their final days. Brandon walked slowly, unnoticed, a faded hood pulled over his head, hands buried in the pockets of a worn coat. He made his way across the empty campus until he reached the memorial wall. A slab of dark stone stood near the flagpole. On it, the names of the 27 who had disappeared were etched in bronze, beneath the words, "Gone, but never forgotten." Brandon kneeled in front of it. In his hands, he held something wrapped in cloth, an old yearbook, the same one that had been recovered from the bus, moldy and damaged, but still intact. He opened the back cover gently. Inside, tucked between the pages, was a single folded note, written by Brandon. No one saw him place it there. No one would notice it for weeks, but the message was clear. "We tried to leave, only I made it. I am sorry." He sat there in silence, not speaking, not moving, just staring at the names. One by one, face by face, friends, classmates, people who never got to grow up, people who had trusted him to keep filming, to keep laughing, to keep everything. Light, but he had seen the fire, he had heard the screams, and he had run when he finally stood up. The clouds above were beginning to break, letting pale light touch the stone. He turned without a word and walked away, disappearing down the same empty street that had once led them all to adventure. There was no music, no police, no cameras, just one boy who survived, carrying the memory of those who never had. Some say Brandon was a coward. Others say he was chosen. But maybe the truth is something much simpler. Maybe he was just a kid who saw too much and never stopped running from it. The forest never gave back the rest. And maybe it never will, but that yearbook, that note, and that old cracked bus will always be a part of Alder Creek's history, a wound carved into its soil, whispered in classrooms, and passed down as a story that feels too real to be fiction. And if you are still watching this story, it means one thing: this tale deserves your like and your subscription. Help me complete the 5,000 likes on this video, because, as I told you, this is a dare from my mother. It costs nothing, but it means everything. Drop a like, subscribe to Unscripted Tales, and tell me in the comments what city are you watching from. And tell me, do you believe Brandon told the truth?